CEO offers single black father an unconventional family support. The grocery receipt crumpled in Damon Mitchell's weathered hands as he stared at the numbers that didn't add up no matter how many times he calculated them. $15.37 remaining in his checking account, rent due in 4 days, and his 6-year-old daughter Zoe asking why they were eating peanut butter sandwiches for dinner again. The fluorescent lights of the corner market buzzed overhead like angry wasps, casting harsh shadows across his face as he tried to figure out how to make miracles happen with pocket change. At 31, Damon had become an expert in the mathematics of survival that single parents master through necessity rather than choice. Wake at 4:30 a.m. to prep for his construction job, drop Zoe at Mrs. Patterson's house by 6:15 a.m., work 10-hour shifts carrying materials and operating machinery that paid just enough to keep them housed, but never quite enough to get ahead. Pick up Zoe by 7 p.m., help with homework while dinner cooked, read bedtime stories that promised better tomorrows, then collapse into exhausted sleep before repeating the cycle that had defined their lives for the past 2 years. The routine had sustained them since Zoe's mother disappeared into the night, leaving behind only a note about needing to find herself and a 6-month-old baby who would never understand why her mama chose freedom over family. Damon had rebuilt his life around Zoe's needs, transforming from a young man with dreams of his own into a father whose every decision revolved around protecting the bright-eyed little girl who called him daddy, with absolute trust that he would somehow make everything okay. But tonight, staring at groceries he couldn't afford and bills he couldn't pay, Damon felt the weight of that trust threatening to crush him. The construction industry had been hit hard by economic slowdowns, and his company had cut hours just enough to avoid layoffs, but not enough to maintain living wages. His apartment was a 4th-floor walk-up in a neighborhood where sirens provided the soundtrack, and safety was a luxury they couldn't afford. Still, it was home, the only stability Zoe had known since her world had been turned upside down by maternal abandonment. The business card tucked behind his driver's license had been there for 3 weeks, growing more wrinkled with each time he'd pulled it out to stare at the embossed letters that seemed too good to be real. Alexander Rothschild, CEO, Rothschild Development Group. With a handwritten note on the back, "Mr. Mitchell, I'd like to discuss an opportunity that could benefit both our families. Please call when convenient." The card had appeared in his work locker with no explanation, no context. No reason for one of the city's most powerful real estate developers to know his name, much less want to meet with him. Alexander Rothschild built skyscrapers and luxury complexes, moved in circles where political leaders and corporate titans made decisions that affected millions of people. He wasn't someone who typically concerned himself with construction workers who lived paycheck to paycheck in apartments that would probably be demolished to make way for his next development project. Damon had researched Rothschild development online during his lunch breaks, using the public library's computers to read articles about Alexander's business empire and philanthropic activities. The man was 38 years old, Harvard-educated inheritor of a construction dynasty that had shaped the city's skyline for 3 generations. But between the corporate press releases and society page photographs, Damon found hints of a more personal story. Alexander was also a single father, raising his 8-year-old son alone after his wife's death in a car accident 2 years earlier. The coincidence felt too significant to ignore, but Damon had learned not to trust things that seemed too good to be true. Life had taught him that miracles were rare, and when they did appear, they usually came with costs he couldn't afford to pay. Still, desperation had a way of making impossible options seem worth exploring, and tonight's grocery calculation had pushed him past the point where pride could override necessity. His phone-cracked screen held together with electrical tape displayed Alexander Rothschild's number, with the kind of clarity that made procrastination impossible. One call might change everything, or it might confirm what Damon already suspected, that whatever Alexander wanted, it wasn't something designed to benefit a single father from the wrong side of economic inequality. But as Zoe's voice drifted from their apartment upstairs singing the alphabet song while she played with dolls whose clothes had been mended multiple times, Damon realized he was out of alternatives. His construction supervisor had mentioned possible layoffs next month. The landlord had been increasingly aggressive about rent collection. Zoe's school had sent home information about after-school programs they couldn't afford, and field trips that might as well have been trips to the moon for all their financial accessibility. The call connected on the second ring, answered by a voice that carried the confidence of someone accustomed to having his time valued and his decisions respected. "Mr. Mitchell," Alexander said, recognizing the number before Damon could introduce himself. "I was hoping you'd call. Are you available to meet tomorrow afternoon? I have something I'd like to propose that I think could benefit both our families. The phrasing was careful professional, but carried undertones that suggested genuine personal investment rather than corporate charity. Alexander proposed meeting at a neutral location, a coffee shop near Zoe's school, where Damon could bring her along rather than arranging separate childcare he couldn't afford. Mr. Rothschild, I appreciate the call, but I should be honest, I don't know why someone like you would want to meet with someone like me. Alexander's response came without hesitation. Because sometimes the best partnerships happen between people who understand what it means to put family first, regardless of their bank accounts. The next afternoon, Damon arrived at the coffee shop 15 minutes early. Zoe's small hand warm in his as they navigated sidewalks crowded with people who looked like they belonged in this upscale neighborhood. His work boots felt out of place against polished floors, and his second-hand jacket seemed shabby compared to the designer clothing worn by other customers. But Zoe's excitement about visiting a fancy coffee place reminded him that she didn't see their differences. She only saw an adventure with her daddy. Alexander Rothschild entered precisely on time, but nothing about his appearance matched Damon's expectations of billionaire behavior. Instead of an expensive suit, he wore jeans and a simple button-down shirt. Instead of corporate entourage, he arrived alone carrying a messenger bag that looked well-used rather than fashionable. Instead of treating the meeting like a business appointment, he knelt immediately to Zoe's eye level and introduced himself with the natural ease of someone comfortable with children. "You must be Zoe," Alexander said, his smile genuine and warm. "I brought someone I think you'd like to meet." From behind him stepped a boy about Zoe's age with sandy brown hair and curious eyes that held the kind of careful intelligence that developed in children who'd learned to read adult emotions for security cues. He carried a backpack covered with science-themed patches and wore the slightly rumpled appearance of a child more interested in discovery than appearance. "This is my son, Benjamin," Alexander continued. "He's been excited to meet another kid whose parent understands that family comes first." Benjamin offered Zoe a shy smile and pulled a book from his backpack, a colorfully illustrated guide to local birds that immediately captured her attention. Within minutes, they were seated at a corner table, heads bent together over pages of wildlife photography, their conversation animated by the kind of instant connection that children create when adults remove barriers to natural friendship. "Shall we let them get acquainted while we talk?" Alexander suggested, gesturing toward a table positioned to keep the children in view while providing space for adult conversation. As they settled into chairs that cost more than Damon's weekly grocery budget, Alexander's demeanor shifted from parental warmth to something more direct and purposeful, though no less genuine. "I'm going to be completely honest with you, Damon." He began using the informal name without asking permission, a gesture that somehow felt respectful rather than presumptuous. "I've been watching you work for the past 6 months, and I have a proposal that's going to sound unconventional, possibly even unbelievable." Damon's muscles tensed instinctively. 6 months of observation felt like surveillance, and his experiences with authority figures had taught him to be suspicious when powerful people claimed to have his best interests at heart. "Before you get defensive," Alexander continued reading the shift in body language with practiced accuracy. "Let me explain why I've been paying attention and what I'm hoping to propose." Alexander's story emerged in careful detail throughout their conversation. 2 years earlier, his wife Sarah had died in a car accident that left him struggling to balance an demanding business empire with the needs of a grieving 6-year-old son. Benjamin had withdrawn into himself, stopped eating regularly, began having nightmares that left both father and son exhausted and emotionally depleted. Traditional therapy had helped, but what Benjamin needed most was consistent adult presence, someone who understood that children required stability and attention that couldn't be delegated to employees or purchased through expensive services. "I tried hiring nannies, au pair, family assistants." Alexander explained, his voice carrying the frustration of someone who'd discovered that money couldn't solve every problem. Benjamin was polite to all of them, but he never connected. He needed something authentic, someone who understood what it meant to be the only parent responsible for another person's entire world. Alexander had been driving through Damon's neighborhood after a frustrating evening with yet another failed childcare arrangement when he'd seen something that stopped him completely. Damon and Zoe were walking home from the library, her small backpack bulging with books while she chattered excitedly about something she'd learned. What caught Alexander's attention wasn't just the obvious affection between father and daughter, but the way Damon listened with complete presence, as if Zoe's 6-year-old observations about dinosaurs or space exploration were the most important conversations he could possibly be having. "I followed you." Alexander admitted his honesty carrying embarrassment rather than pride. "Not in a creepy way, but enough to understand your routine, your priorities, your approach to parenting. I watched you help her with homework on library steps when your apartment was too noisy. I saw you give her your jacket when it started raining even though that left you soaked. I witnessed you turn down overtime work because it would have interfered with her bedtime routine." The observation felt invasive, but Alexander's tone suggested admiration rather than judgment. He'd been searching for someone who demonstrated the kind of parenting philosophy he wanted to model for Benjamin, someone who understood that children needed presence more than presence consistency, more than luxury authentic relationships, more than purchased entertainment. "What I'm proposing is unconventional." Alexander continued his voice, taking on the careful precision of someone making an offer he'd rehearsed, but never been certain he'd have the courage to voice. "I want to hire you as Benjamin's companion father, not as an employee, but as a co-parent who helps me provide the family structure he's been missing." The concept was so far outside Damon's experience that he struggled to process its implications. Alexander was proposing a living arrangement where Damon and Zoe would move into the guest house on his estate, with Damon receiving a substantial salary for providing Benjamin with consistent male mentorship while Alexander traveled for business or worked late hours. "It's not charity," Alexander insisted, anticipating Damon's instinctive resistance to what might feel like handouts. "Benjamin needs what you naturally provide: stability, authenticity, the kind of fathering that comes from someone who's learned to put a child's needs ahead of everything else. And honestly, I think Zoe might benefit from the educational opportunities and resources I can provide, just as Benjamin would benefit from your parenting approach." The financial details were staggering in their generosity. A six-figure salary, full benefits, college savings accounts established for both children, access to educational opportunities that would transform Zoe's future possibilities. But beyond the money, Alexander was offering something even more valuable: partnership in creating a family structure that could benefit both children while respecting both fathers' autonomy and decision-making authority. "Why me?" Damon asked the question, carrying all his disbelief, confusion, and lingering suspicion that offers too good to be true usually carried hidden costs. Alexander's response came with the simplicity of someone who'd spent months thinking through every aspect of his proposal. "Because you're the kind of father I want Benjamin to learn from, and the kind of man I'd be honored to co-parent alongside." Across the coffee shop, Zoe and Benjamin had moved from the bird book to Benjamin's collection of science experiment kits, their conversation animated by discoveries and shared enthusiasm for learning. Watching them together, Damon could see the potential. Alexander described two children who could complement each other's strengths while providing the sibling-like companionship both had been missing. "I need time to think," Damon said, his natural caution warring with the desperate hope that this impossible offer might actually be genuine. "Of course," Alexander replied, pulling a contract from his messenger bag. "Take this home, review it with a lawyer if you'd like. I'll pay for legal consultation. But Damon, I want you to understand something important." Alexander paused, his expression growing more vulnerable and personal than their conversation had been up to this point. "I'm not offering this because I feel sorry for your situation, or because I want to rescue you from poverty, or because I think you need saving. I'm offering this because Benjamin needs exactly what you provide naturally, and because I believe this arrangement could create the kind of family environment both our children deserve." The contract outlined expectations, responsibilities, and boundaries that protected both families while creating structure for their unconventional collaboration. Damon would maintain complete authority over Zoe's upbringing and education, while providing consistent presence and mentorship for Benjamin during Alexander's frequent business travel. Both children would attend the same private school, participate in activities together, and benefit from the stability of having two committed fathers invested in their success and well-being. As they prepared to leave, Benjamin approached Damon with the careful politeness that well-mannered children use when asking important favors. "Mr. Mitchell, would it be okay if Zoe and I were friends? I don't have many friends because we move around a lot and she knows about birds and dinosaurs, which are my two favorite things." The request broke something loose in Damon's chest, not just because of Benjamin's obvious loneliness, but because he recognized the careful way the boy asked permission before expressing his needs. It was the same cautious approach Zoe had developed since her mother's abandonment, the way children learn to protect themselves from disappointment by expecting less than they hoped for. "I think that sounds like a great idea," Damon replied, kneeling to Benjamin's eye level with instincts honed by 2 years of single fatherhood. "Maybe you could teach Zoe about science experiments and she could show you some of the games we play at home. Benjamin's smile transformed his entire face, revealing the confident, curious child hidden beneath layers of grief and uncertainty. Beside him, Zoe bounced on her toes with excitement about having found someone who shared her enthusiasm for learning and discovery. The walk home felt different than any journey Damon had taken in months. Instead of calculating bills and counting dollars, his mind was occupied with possibilities that stretched far beyond his current ability to imagine. The contract in his jacket pocket felt like a bridge between the life they'd been surviving and the life they might actually be able to build. That evening, after Zoe was asleep, Damon spread the contract across their small kitchen table and began reading through terms that would reshape their entire existence. The legal language was dense, but the intentions were clear. Alexander was proposing a partnership that would provide financial security while respecting both fathers' roles and authority in their children's lives. The salary alone would solve every financial crisis currently threatening their stability while providing resources for Zoe's education, healthcare, and future opportunities. But beyond the immediate benefits, the arrangement offered something even more valuable: the chance to give both children the family structure they'd been missing while creating authentic relationships built on mutual respect and shared commitment to nurturing young lives. Mrs. Patterson knocked softly on his door around 9 p.m., her weathered face creased with curiosity and concern. She'd been more than a babysitter, she'd been family, the grandmother figure who'd helped raise Zoe when Damon's work schedule made consistency challenging. "That little girl was chattering about her new friend all evening," she said, settling into the chair across from him with the familiarity of someone who'd earned the right to honest conversation. "She said you met a man with a son who knows everything about birds and science." Damon explained the afternoon's events, and Alexander's proposal, watching Mrs. Patterson's expression shift from surprise to thoughtful consideration. Her opinion mattered. She'd been witness to his struggles, supporter of his efforts, and advocate for Zoe's well-being since the day he'd knocked on her door with a crying baby and absolutely no idea how to be a single father. "Sounds too good to be true," she said finally, her tone carrying the skepticism that life had taught her about offers that promised to solve all problems simultaneously. "That's what I keep thinking," Damon admitted. "But I watched him with his son, and it didn't feel like performance or charity. It felt like one struggling parent recognizing another." Mrs. Patterson studied the contract with eyes that had seen enough legal documents to recognize both opportunity and potential exploitation. Her questions were pointed and practical. What happens if the arrangement doesn't work out? What protections exist for Zoe's well-being? How are decisions made about education, discipline, and future planning? "The contract seems fair," she concluded after an hour of careful review. "More than fair, actually. But contracts are just paper. What matters is whether you trust this man with your daughter's heart." The question cut to the core of Damon's uncertainty. Trust wasn't something he granted easily, especially to people whose wealth and power placed them in completely different worlds. But Alexander's behavior that afternoon, the way he'd treated both children with respect and genuine interest, the vulnerability he'd shown when discussing his own parenting challenges, the careful structure he'd created to protect both families' autonomy, suggested someone who understood that authentic relationships couldn't be purchased or demanded, only earned through consistent, respectful interaction. Over the next week, Damon found himself looking forward to Alexander's daily phone calls with anticipation that surprised him. Their conversations began with updates about the children, but gradually expanded into discussions about parenting philosophy, work-life balance, and the challenges of raising children who would grow up in a world neither father had experienced in their own childhood. Alexander shared stories about Benjamin's struggles with grief counseling and social anxiety, his brilliance in science and mathematics, his need for consistent male presence during a developmental stage where father figures became crucial for identity formation. In return, Damon talked about Zoe's resilience and curiosity, her artistic talents and academic potential, her occasional nightmares about being abandoned again, and her absolute faith that her daddy would always protect her. The conversations revealed alignment in values that transcended their economic differences. Both men prioritized their children's emotional well-being over social expectations. Both believed in honest communication, consistent boundaries, and the importance of allowing children to develop their natural interests and talents. Both had learned through single parenthood that love alone wasn't sufficient. Children also needed structure, stability, and access to opportunities that would prepare them for successful adulthood. "I want to try it," Damon told Alexander during their 7th phone conversation. Not because I need rescuing, but because I think you might be right about what our kids could gain from this arrangement. Alexander's relief was audible through the phone, followed immediately by practical discussions about logistics timelines and expectations. They would start with a trial period, 3 months living in the guest house while both families adjusted to their new dynamic. If the arrangement worked for everyone, they would reassess and potentially commit to a longer-term partnership. The moving process itself felt surreal. Professional movers carefully packed belongings that had never seemed valuable enough for such treatment, transporting their modest possessions to accommodations that exceeded any luxury Damon had previously experienced. The guest house was larger than their apartment, furnished with tasteful simplicity that managed to feel both elegant and comfortable. But what impressed Damon most was how Alexander had prepared the space for their arrival. Zoe's room was decorated in her favorite colors, with art supplies arranged on shelves and a reading nook positioned to catch afternoon sunlight. The kitchen was stocked with ingredients for meals he'd mentioned during their phone conversations. A small office space was set up with a computer and desk where Damon could pursue the online business courses he'd mentioned wanting to take. "I want you both to feel at home here," Alexander explained as they toured the space together. "This isn't temporary housing, this is your home designed around your family's needs and preferences." The first dinner together was awkward in the way that new relationships always are, but the children's natural ease with each other helped bridge adult uncertainties. Benjamin showed Zoe his extensive library of science books, while she demonstrated card tricks she'd learned during their library visits. Alexander and Damon found themselves falling into comfortable conversation about work, education, and the daily logistics of managing two households that were becoming one extended family. Over the following weeks, routines emerged that surprised everyone with their natural evolution. Mornings began with both families gathering for breakfast, the children comparing homework, while the adults discussed daily schedules and shared responsibilities. Alexander's business travel became opportunities for Damon to demonstrate his approach to consistent parenting, while Alexander's presence during school events and activities provided Zoe with exposure to educational opportunities she'd never previously accessed. The arrangement wasn't without challenges. Benjamin occasionally tested boundaries with Damon in ways he never attempted with his father, while Zoe sometimes became overwhelmed by the wealth and privilege surrounding their new life. Both children needed reassurance that their family structure remained stable despite its unconventional nature, and both fathers had to navigate questions about authority, discipline, and decision-making that traditional families never confronted. But the benefits became apparent almost immediately. Benjamin's social anxiety diminished as he gained confidence through Damon's patient mentorship and Zoe's enthusiastic friendship. Zoe's academic performance improved dramatically with access to educational resources and the intellectual stimulation of living alongside someone who shared her curiosity about the world. For the fathers, the partnership provided something neither had expected: adult companionship that understood the unique challenges and rewards of single parenthood. Their evening conversations after the children were asleep became opportunities to discuss parenting strategies, share concerns, and provide each other with the kind of support that extended family members typically offered. 3 months after moving into the guest house, Damon realized he'd stopped thinking of their arrangement as temporary or experimental. This had become their life, not perfect but authentic and sustainable in ways that benefited everyone involved. The financial security Alexander provided had allowed Damon to enroll in business courses that could eventually lead to starting his own construction company. The stability Damon provided had allowed Alexander to expand his business internationally while maintaining confidence that Benjamin was receiving consistent, loving care. Most importantly, both children were thriving in ways that neither father could have achieved alone. Benjamin had developed social confidence and emotional resilience through Damon's steady presence and Zoe's enthusiastic friendship. Zoe had gained access to educational opportunities and cultural experiences that were expanding her understanding of what she could achieve in life. The legal adoption papers Alexander presented 6 months into their arrangement came as a surprise but felt like a natural evolution of relationships that had grown far beyond their original business parameters. He wasn't asking to replace Damon's parental authority, but to formalize his commitment to Zoe's well-being and future security. "I want her to know she's not just welcome in our family, she belongs in our family." Alexander explained, his voice carrying the emotion of someone who discovered that love could expand to include children who weren't biologically his own. In return, Damon found himself considering what had once seemed impossible, allowing Alexander to formally adopt some parental responsibilities for Zoe, while Damon assumed similar roles in Benjamin's life. The arrangement would create legal and financial security for both children while acknowledging the emotional reality of relationships that had developed organically through shared commitment and daily care. The conversation about formal adoption happened on a Saturday morning while both children were at Benjamin's science club, meeting their excited voices fading as Alexander drove them to activities that represented the kind of enrichment opportunities both fathers wanted to provide. "I never imagined family could look like this." Damon admitted, his honesty carrying wonder rather than regret. "But watching them together, seeing how they've both grown, I can't imagine any other arrangement working better for any of us." Alexander's response carried similar amazement. "I spent months searching for someone who could help me give Benjamin what he needed. I never expected to find someone who would help me understand what I needed too." The formal adoption process took several months, requiring legal documentation, psychological evaluations, and court appearances that felt simultaneously significant and anticlimactic. By the time the judge officially recognized their expanded family structure, the emotional reality had been established through daily routines, shared responsibilities, and the kind of deep affection that develops when adults commit completely to children's well-being, regardless of biological connections. The celebration dinner that evening was held at the same coffee shop where they'd first met, now transformed into a place that held memory and meaning for all four family members. Benjamin and Zoe had prepared presentations about their scientific study of family evolution, complete with charts documenting their growth in happiness, academic performance, and social confidence since the arrangement began. "Our hypothesis was correct," Benjamin announced with 8-year-old seriousness. "Two dads and shared siblings create optimal conditions for child development and adult happiness." Zoe's contribution was more artistic, a series of drawings showing their family structure evolution from before two separate smaller families to after one larger, more colorful family with expanded possibilities. Looking around the table at faces that had become his daily reality, Damon marveled at how completely his understanding of family had been transformed. Alexander wasn't just Benjamin's father or Zoe's adoptive parent. He'd become a true partner in the complex, rewarding work of raising children who felt secure, valued, and prepared for futures that were now limited only by their own imagination and effort. The unconventional family support Alexander had offered hadn't just solved Damon's immediate financial crisis, it had created something neither man could have built alone. Two children who might have grown up feeling incomplete now had the security of knowing they were wanted, supported, and loved by adults who'd chosen to prioritize their well-being above social conventions or traditional expectations. As they walked home that evening, Zoe's hand warm in Damon's while she chattered excitedly to Benjamin about plans for their next science experiment, Alexander fell into step beside them with the natural ease that had characterized their relationship from its unconventional beginning. "Thank you," Alexander said quietly, his words directed at Damon but carrying gratitude that encompassed everything their partnership had created and sustained. "Thank you," Damon replied, understanding that Alexander's offer had been less about charity and more about recognizing potential for mutual benefit that traditional family structures couldn't provide. Above them, stars were becoming visible in the darkening sky, and Benjamin immediately began pointing out constellations, while Zoe asked questions about space exploration and planetary distances. Their conversation filled the evening air with wonder and curiosity, the sound of children who felt secure enough to dream about infinite possibilities. The CEO's unconventional offer had indeed created extraordinary bonds, not just between Alexander and Damon, but between two families who discovered that love could expand to include people who weren't related by blood, but were connected by shared commitment to nurturing young lives toward their highest potential. Walking toward a home that housed dreams as expansive as the universe Benjamin and Zoe were discussing, Damon realized that sometimes the most profound family support came not from traditional sources, but from unexpected partnerships built on mutual respect, shared values, and the revolutionary idea that children's well-being could unite adults across every boundary society typically used to keep families separate and struggling alone.